Welcome to one of my favorite biblical studies libraries. I brought you here to show you a few images, some of my favorite images, from the very first chapter of Ruth, the very beginning of Ruth, by way of just introducing you to the subject matter of Ruth and getting you into some of the strong emotion and some of the theology and spirituality of the passage, just to warm you up for our discussion in a bit. The first picture is by our own Peggy Parker, essentially the seminary artist theologian, and it's a woodcut that she did with the family of Elimelech and Naomi and their two sons, Machlon and Chilion, facing into their journey to Moab because of the famine in the land. And this painting is actually inspired by the geography leading from Bethlehem over into Moab. This is one of the likely passes into that foreign land. The next photo is an archaeological discovery from Egypt, illustrating some of the realia behind periodic famines that ravaged much of the Fertile Crescent. This happens to be the stele of Mentuhotep, and it mentions some deficient Nile flooding that the governor in charge during this Middle Kingdom period was not able to control or to help the people to avoid famine. This next photo is from a pretty cool set of art pieces done by a German named Willy Wiedmann. He produced this sort of Picasso-like art illustrating the entire Bible. This particular drawing illustrates the two young sons, Machlon and Chilion. They were sort of weak, pining figures. At least that's what their names seem to sound like. And that's somewhat illustrated by these kids. They don't look all that well in the picture, and in fact they soon die, leading to Naomi's grief. This next artwork by Wiedmann is also illustrative of the growing family of Elimelech and Naomi when the sons, Machlon and Chilion, meet Moabite women and marry them. This next illustration is an archaeological find. So again, this is a figurine from the Iron II period, so the era of the divided kingdoms of Israel and Judah, a little bit later than the time of the setting of the book of Ruth, but certainly artwork from around the time that the book was put in writing. And we think that this is either an Edomite or a Moabite woman. So this is an example of at least how people might have imagined a Moabite woman like Ruth or Orpah to have looked. Now with this next shot, we get back to Naomi again and Peggy Parker's woodcut illustrating her. And I think the woodcut captures well her despondency. She's really hit very deeply. You can really feel her pain in this picture at the death not only of her husband Elimelech, but then the two sons, so that she's left just with the two daughters-in-law, the Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah, that the sons married. So the crisis has begun in the book. This next illustration is a seated woman covering her face in really powerfal grief and mourning. It's a 20th century, early 20th century sculpture by Antoni Samara Tugues. It's called Desconsole, and you can really, at least I can enter into the deep mourning and just the turning away, and you can actually feel in this sculpture what Naomi expresses in the text when she tries to turn away from the two daughters-in-law and withdraw into her own grief and indeed her own bitterness. This next image is actually an aerial photograph, and it shows some of the rough terrain that Naomi in her grief was facing as she needed to get back across either the Jordan River or going beneath the Dead Sea here, somehow to get back to Bethlehem. You can see it's not exactly flat terrain. You're going down from the Moab Plateau down into the lowest point on earth and then back up as they return to, as Naomi and Ruth eventually convinces Naomi to come along, they return back to Bethlehem in the land of Judah. This next photo is an artwork by Peter Lastman from 1614. It's a 17th century painting that I think captures in a very profound way this interaction. And look for the sets of dialogue in chapter 1 of Ruth as you read through it. There's more than one interaction until finally Ruth convinces Naomi to let at least her come along. And you can see by these expressions that she's just determined, even though her mother-in-law has the authority, Ruth is determined to reject this idea that she be pushed away. Look at the hands, rejecting Naomi's position on Ruth's behalf, the pushing away that Naomi is doing, these peasant hands with all of their emotion. And then behind the figures, the bridge back into the land of Judah, into Bethlehem, where they eventually both will head. The mourning that all these figures feel at the death of their husbands, their son, Naomi's sons, and her husband, is expressed in this relief of mourning women from Saqqara, from the late 18th and 19th dynasty in Egypt. And you can see this multitude of mourners acting out their grief, throwing dust on their heads, falling down to the ground. This is an expression of the way that the women would have felt in Ruth verse 9 of chapter 1. Now, amidst the grief, Ruth makes this incredible sign of loving kindness, or chesed in Hebrew, this self-giving, selfless, other-centered love. And what's amazing about her pledge of love is that it transcends even death. Now this next Greek tombstone carving shows the dead person that's buried in the tomb holding hands with those who survive after. And in Greek art, that touching of the hands is symbolic of the unity of family that transcends even death. And this is what Ruth is pledging here, that not even death is strong enough force to overcome her chesed, her loving kindness, her other-centered love ideal.